Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dogman Sasquatch Oklahoma Encounters. I'll be your host this evening, Lance Hightower. The brothers and Wiley Dave Fritz are out, so you'll have just me for this episode. Before we get going, I would like to say, if you or anyone you know has had a bizarre or unexplainable encounter, we'd like to hear from you. We know that for every encounter, someone calls and finally shares their story. There's dozens and dozens of others that will never share their story. They're afraid of ridicule. They're afraid of being called crazy. We want to hear your story. And the reason being is that it's more than for just us. It's actually for others out there that don't realize that many others have had very, very similar encounters that's frightened them that they couldn't explain. So by sharing this, it's actually a release. It's informative to others to realize that they're not alone. So you can call our toll-free number anytime, 1-866-306-8085. So this evening, in recognizing our subbers, we want to say, too, that our first subber giveaway, Perry Hersom, that's Hersom. Perry, we've yet to hear from you, buddy. Go ahead and give us a call on that toll-free number and give us your address, and we'll send out your gift. Again, that's Perry Hersom. So tonight on the subbers, we would like to recognize YouTubinger, Tammy Begansky, Clara Jean Rogers, Aaron 1234574, Renichi, the Urantia 001, Eric Miles, Dave Thundercloud, Herman Ventura, Larry Fenimore, D. Doss, Noah Washburn, Ninja 1003, Robert Chapman, Indica Blue, and Brethro Browdeen. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate you, and without you, we would not have a show. We continue to grow, and we really thank you so much for that. So tonight, I am finally getting around to this gentleman here. I know he's been asking, so when we do stories or when stories come in, we don't pick and choose our stories. As they come in, we give we just put it in that order, and we have to edit the stories, and we go through, and if someone doesn't want to be on or anything like that, then I'll narrate the story, and that's how we do it, and I have to, we'll type everything up and make sure it's exactly how they said it. So there is no picking and choosing on the stories. It's just in the order in which they come in. And this gentleman has been very, very patient in waiting for his particular story to come out. And the reason being is that he's just not been able to share to too many people. And very, very knowledgeable gentleman. So we're going to go by his association. He's an association out in Utah, and he goes by his association name called Ogre. And very pleasant gentleman, very knowledgeable, extremely intelligent, and had a couple of experiences that really kind of changed his life, you could say, and has led him kind of on a quest of discovery. So this particular one comes out of Fort Sill, Oklahoma, near the Lawton, Oklahoma area. There's a military base down there. Been down there for years. And this story occurred about 30 years ago, Ogre said. And so this is where we're going to pick up. He presently lives in Utah, and he's been living off and on, but presently he lives there now. And this first encounter, he said that before telling this Fort Sill story, his first encounter occurred about 11 years old, and in Utah while he was with his stepdad and uncle. So, and then he went on to say that he was stationed in Fort Sill for about 2 years. This was about 30 years ago, he said, and he lived in Lawton. And like I said, that he presently lives in Utah, and since about age 7, and he was from the Virginia area. And so he said that while he was stationed at Fort Sill, he was in the 13 Bravo training there, which is the cannon crewman, stationed with a training unit after his own training. He said that they had, this particular encounter occurred, they had just set up a bivouac site, which is a site in which they'll use timbers and natural terrain for cover or shelter. And they were on a firing range for artillery pieces. And these were self-propelled 155 and 8-inch. These were the huge U-shaped line of artillery pieces, and the trainees at that time had smaller artillery pieces also on the line. And he said that it had been extremely cold. Not a lot of snow, But he said, it gets damn cold in the winter out there, Lance. He said, you know what I'm talking about. And I said, sure. And he said, it also floods sometimes when it rains. It's crazy. He was a corporal at the time, and he was with a PFC. And they were in a GP medium, which stands for, it was a general purpose medium tent, kind of like a canvas tent, a hunting outdoor tent you would see in Colorado or Utah, and these hunting guide tents. And they had a fire barrel for heat inside. It had a table, 2 sleeping cots, and a field phone, so they could call back to CQ at the charge quarters every hour on the hour to make a report. That's just the way it was, and that's exactly what you did, or you would hear from command. He said the PFC would typically, they would go to the west, and I would go to the east every hour on the hour, and we would circle and walk around these huge guns, artillery guns, because this was a weekend, and it wasn't unknown that the weekend that some of the locals would drive around some of these areas drunk and may drive around the wrong place at the wrong time in our area and possibly get hurt with the night firing we were doing. So our job, this was a huge artillery line, again in the shape of a U, and all these artillery lines were in this massive, long U shape. And so what we had to do, like he said, my PFC would go around to the one side, and I would start walking around the other, just to make everything was secure. There was no locals out there hanging on one of the tanks or anything like that. We just wanted to make sure everything was secure, and that was our job that night. So he said, your job again was just to keep people off where they shouldn't be, and that nobody can mess around with the artillery pieces. So the PFC was heading to the west, circling the artillery pieces, and I'm heading off to the east, also circling around the artillery pieces. He said, now mind you, the moon is up. It was about 2:45 a.m. in the morning, so 0300 hours. It seemed like hours for me when this actually occurred, but it was actually just a few minutes, Lance. He said, I was about 2 howitzers before the end one, before I would loop around the end of the back and loop around the front. He said, we were all bundled up. Again, it was cold. I had my M16, and it had blanks in it. He said this was just a nighttime firing training that we did, and we did it early in the morning. He said, as I was coming around almost to the end, again, I was circling around off to the east. He said, when I was almost to the end, I heard this deep growl. I can't even mimic it. He said, I immediately stopped and thought this was a coyote. Crap, what's a coyote doing right here? Especially with all the artillery pieces being fired. That's what was bizarre to me. Well, contrary to what others say about having an encounter, he said, Lance, and you're in the military and they shot at it and stuff, here in America, if they say that, they're lying, because they don't give you live ammo when you're on a post unless you're like at a nuclear facility, like on guard duty or something. You typically get blanks, and that's what we had. Again, this was training. That's it. So I had an M16 rifle with blanks for ammo, no live rounds, and we had hand grenade simulators too. So they just made noise. So when I heard this growl, I flipped my selector switch on the rifle, because back then it was an M16A1, which had a selector switch, which went to safe, semi, and to auto on the left side of the rifle. He said, I flipped my rifle down to auto, the selector switch to auto, and I thought I'd just burn off a clip and scare this coyote out of here in case there was any more. And since these are like dogs, they'll hear the noise and they'll be gone. No harm. So I thought. So I began to sneak along the left side of this 8-inch howitzer, up the track of this howitzer. Now, he said, Lance, these howitzers are huge. They're gigantic. He said they're much bigger than a tank. They're bigger than the Abrams, because this is artillery, not a tank. These 8-inch howitzers are our biggest artillery piece. In fact, he said the 155 self-propelled you can ride in like a tank. That's 155 millimeters, he said. The 8-inch is 8 inches around. This is how big it is. It has a driver's seat that he can sit inside, but his head is kind of sticking out and exposed. But the guy who is firing sits behind the tube off to the side because of the recoil. There's a couple of tractor type of seats for the guys loading it, and the round are so heavy. He said each round is about 210 pounds, just the rounds. And the round is lifted up with a hydraulic lift. Then he places big bags of gunpowder at the back, which charges the round. And literally what fires the round, Lance, he said once they close the breech, it's like a shotgun shell. That's the primer. So he went on with the story. He said, anyway, I'm sneaking around this howitzer track because this is where the sound came from, and I want to burn this clip off. So I'm sneaking around the side of this track, of this howitzer. So I look up, I glance up. It's just natural to do this, Lance, when you're in the military. Now, all of these howitzer gun tubes, he said, are always kept elevated to about 45 degrees. And the tubes have these little canvas bags. It's like a slip over the end to keep out the moisture, like a little slip cover over the end of the barrels out of the tubes, to keep rain out, snow out, and debris out of the gun tubes. Now, the height of this gun barrel or tube was about 10 feet because we know the exact measurement because of what we have to measure the exact height from a colorimeter when setting these gun tubes. Now, what I saw as I looked up, walking along this howitzer track, was, I can't say it any other way, it was a Bigfoot. It was facing me, facing south because the tubes were pointing north. He said it was amazing. It had its left arm slung up and over this howitzer gun tube with its right arm down by its side, like it's just standing there casually. And I kind of walked almost into it because I was so focused on being quiet going around this track. Now, the moon was real bright, he said, and it was behind this Bigfoot. It was very clearly silhouetted. It looked like, he said, Lance, it looked like some gigantic, tall, grayish, lean basketball player. That's the best way to describe it. It wasn't this big or bulky figure that, like most people explain when they have an encounter that you hear about on some sightings, like that occurred in Utah or the Pacific Northwest. It was this gigantic, tall, kind of a gray, lean basketball player. That's the only way I can explain it. Once this experience happened and I came face to face with this thing, and well, he said, let me back up. Once this experience happened and I got out of the service, I've been off and on studying over the past 25 years what this thing was and what happened to me. Because once you see something like this, it can't be unseen. As scary as this is, you're almost addicted in searching and finding out more about what these creatures are, he said. He said, so I'm freaking out because all the emotions come flooding back to me of what happened to me when I was 11 with my first encounter out in Utah, when I was with my stepdad, my uncle, and a friend. He said it happened so fast. All the emotion came rushing back when I encountered this thing right at that howitzer. So I immediately knew what it was. There was no question. It had to be a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot. He said, so I immediately started talking to it. I said, please, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. I just want to go back to my tent. I'll go away. So I dropped the barrel of my weapon. I had it up, and I slowly dropped it down. I took my finger off the trigger, and it was straight beside the trigger guard. Because if I have to run in order to buy some time, I'll burn off rounds anyway and run like a mad dog, I thought. I honestly thought I was dead, though, Lance. He goes, I honestly thought, this is it. I'm dead. This thing is huge, and I'm really close to it. It started to growl again, he said, Lance. But it was so low and deep with this growl that literally the bones in my chest vibrated. And literally the metal in my M16 rifle at what the ejection port was at, where the spent rounds are ejected, once the gun is fired, it has a little flap there. He said it was vibrating like bzzz, because this thing, the growl was so intense and so deep that I could feel the vibration in my chest and my gun was rattling. So I'm backing up, and it seems like it's forever, and I almost thought that there was one behind me, because all of a sudden I bumped into something, and I thought that this something was going to, honestly, was another Sasquatch, and it was going to wrap its arms around me from behind and squeeze the crap out of me. I'm dead. I'm a dead man. It's going to tear my limbs off, limb from limb. But I heard, as soon as I bumped into this, whatever it was, it had a like a metal sound, boom, sound at the same time. So I whipped my head quickly around to see what I had bumped into, and it was an empty 55-gallon fire barrel that you poke holes into, that you put coals or wood in. We usually drop military gas in, light them, so the trainees can keep their hands warm when it gets really cold during these military training nights. So I quickly whip my head back in front of me to make sure that I'm not going to be charged by this Bigfoot. And there's nothing, he said, Lance. There's nothing. It's gone. So I backed up one step at a time, as quickly as I can walk backwards with my head like on a swivel, looking backwards and forwards as I'm moving back, looking all around me as far as I can look, looking, moving, back, until I'm back at the tent. I bump into the tent, then I call for the PFC. We'll call him Joe. I said, Joe! I flipped open the flap to the tent open and turn on the lights inside. And once you come out there, you go from outside to inside a tent. You have to wait about 5 minutes to allow your eyes to adjust to the light. You know what I'm talking about, Lance. I said, sure. He goes, back then, it was the old lanterns that we had. So it took me a minute to kind of get my eyes adjusted. And I realized Joe isn't in the tent. He's not back yet for making his round from the circling the west side of this artillery battery of pieces we have out there. And I'm panicking because at 3 o'clock we're supposed to make that next check-in call. And it's pretty close to that, being 3 o'clock within about 30 seconds. That's how quick all this happened. All in about 15 minutes for me to get out there, make the rounds, I had this encounter, and to get back to the tent. And again, I'm freaking out. I'm thinking, he's not back. Should I go ahead and make my report? Make the call? Say he's missing? What should I do? Should I go help him? Because I knew that if I didn't call within about 30 seconds, they were going to call me and want to know what the hell was going on. And while I was trying to make my mind up, again, this was all happening pretty fast, he said, Lance. Then all of a sudden, the tent flaps opened, and I swiveled around with my gun, and it's loaded. And my partner, he said, what the hell was that? I said, you heard that? He said, yes. What the hell was that growling? And I told him what it was, and he said, you're crazy, man. It was just a bunch of coyotes, man. Of course, I knew what it was. And this was the second time that I was called crazy for seeing a Bigfoot. The first time I had a Bigfoot encounter that occurred out in Utah when I was 11, I got accused of being crazy by my stepdad and my uncle, and they told me that I was crazy when I told them what had occurred. So I said, dude, I'm telling you the truth. I told him about my experience when I was 11 out in Utah, and he said, well, it's time to make a report. Are you going to report this incident? I said, I don't dare tell them, because I don't want to ruin my career. I don't want them to think I was some nut job and get me kicked out or something. But at the same time, if you leave anything out of a report, they try to scare it into you that they know everything that's going on and that they're somehow spying on you. You know, but I didn't tell. I just hoped and prayed that they didn't know about this incident. He said, Lance, my first marriage was about 27 years, and I never told my wife about this or even my first encounter until I was about 21 years into our 27-year marriage. And she called me crazy, and she laughed at me when I told her. So I kind of kept this silent. Then once the computer started becoming very popular and the World Wide Web, and stories started coming on the website, and people began posting things about Bigfoot encounters like Bigfoot Crossroads and stuff. I can't stand that show, he said, Not Finding Bigfoot. I just can't stand the show, Lance. I call it Not Finding Bigfoot. I watched it the first couple of seasons, then I was like, come on, man, I've seen this thing twice in almost 51 years, and they can't find Bigfoot traveling across the countries or the Himalayas. He said, I just stopped watching that crap. So I just kept my mouth shut until now. So Ogre and I continue to talk in regards to his current research that he's been on a quest for. He's conducting it in the place currently where he lives in Utah. It must be a beautiful place based on what he told me. Of course, we'll talk about this and more on the next episode as I talk with Ogre as he goes into the encounter that he had when he was 11. That's really has terrified him since. We'll continue to talk with him on what occurred during that time at 11 that's literally, of course, changed his life and outlook on what else is in the woods. It was a pleasure in speaking to Ogre. I found him to be extremely credible and detailed in his recollection of what happened on that cold, early morning night in Oklahoma some 30 years ago while stationed in Fort Sill. He told, as we discussed more, he said, Lance, he goes, there's many people in the military that have seen things. He goes, that's a lot of acreage out there at Fort Sill. He said, but when you talk to some of the commanding officers, they tell you whatever you see out here stays out here. Nothing like this goes in a report. And isn't that kind of interesting? In talking to Ogre, I was thinking in my head as I was talking to him how a lot of these sightings that occur in national parks or refuge areas or different types of authority figures that are out there, they will hear what you have to say, but they won't report it, or there'll be two reports. And I think that's really a travesty where the people are not given the real truth on what's out there. And there's probably numerous reasons. I would like to just see it given, but of course that never happens. And a lot of it's financial reasons. Can you imagine if people in national parks actually knew that there was a bipedal upright creature or a dogman-like creature roaming out there freely? Do you think very many people would camp, hunt, fish, explore, hike? No, not many would. It'd be like the zoo is loose, and we have these creatures out here that could kidnap you, and yeah, they're really big. They're like 500, 800, 900 pounds, and, people would really freak and never go to these areas, which all that generates a lack of money, revenues. So the industry would take a hit just in the money issue. And there's probably a dozen other reasons why these things never get reported. So that kind of reminded me of that as I was talking to Ogre about how the commanding officers say, whatever you see out here stays out here and will not go into report. Just keep it to yourself. So I thanked him, and we went on to discuss what happened to him, which we'll get to the next episode with Ogre, when it occurred to him, what occurred to him at 11 years of age. So I want to thank you all for listening to this episode, and if you or anyone you know has had a bizarre encounter or was the eyewitness of something strange that you couldn't explain that walks on 2 or 4 legs, give us a call. We'd love to hear from you, to share what happened. You see, for every encounter that you hear, our estimates again are that there's probably dozens of more stories that you'll never hear because people are afraid of ridicule, being called crazy. They don't want to be labeled or judged. But here's the thing. By sharing to others, whether on the radio with me or just sharing your story like Ogre did, others who have had very similar encounters find comfort in knowing that they're not alone, that they've had also an experience that someone else has had that they couldn't explain. And it's kind of a release to share. So protecting your confidentiality is one of our utmost important things that we do on the show. We don't want your name shared unless you want to share it. You don't have to be on the show, but we try to share what happened as to give important information as to what happened and how it happened. So you can call our toll-free number 24/7 anytime you'd like and share. The number again is 1-866-306-8085. Again, that's 1-866-306-8085. Thank you so much for listening. Give me a contact name and that you'd like to share your experience of what happened to you, and I'll call you back. So again, thank you all for listening. We appreciate you guys. Have a great weekend. We are Cryptid Brothers Investigation of Oklahoma. Take care, everyone.